Racist cop jailed black woman for fun unaware she is captain's wife and his career ends. Sometimes a single moment of unchecked prejudice can unravel a life's work. In a quiet corner of Queens, New York, Officer Todd Brannigan, whose career seemed on the rise, pulls over and arrests an unsuspecting black woman on false charges, driven by his own hateful biases rather than actual evidence. Little does he know that his casual act of racism has targeted none other than the beloved wife of his new precinct captain. In a matter of hours, Todd's smug sense of power morphs into an unstoppable chain of events that upends an entire police department and promises a bitter comeuppance for the officer who dared cross the line. Officer Todd Brannigan had been with the NYPD's 109th Precinct for 3 years, long enough to grow confident but not wise. He was part of a fresh wave of recruits bolstered by new city funds, a youthful face behind the badge. While many in uniform joined for genuine desire to serve, Todd's motivations were murkier. Some said he seemed enthralled by the authority a police officer wielded. On an early summer evening, Todd patrolled a modest stretch of Queens Boulevard, scanning passers-by through the tinted windows of his cruiser. The day had been uneventful, just a few parking disputes, a noise complaint, nothing that scratched the itch. Todd felt for a proper takedown. He believed in a world of them versus us, where he had to assert control. At 6 p.m., a simple 911 call came in about a suspicious person near an abandoned building off 44th Avenue. Todd responded swiftly, adrenaline revving. Yet upon arrival, he found nothing but an elderly woman waiting for her bus, crocheting quietly. Disappointed and edgy, he resumed his rounds. That's when a sleek black sedan with tinted windows caught his eye. The driver slowed at a stop sign, then proceeded perfectly legal. Todd felt a reflexive suspicion flicker. Another tinted window violation? Something else? He flipped on his lights, ignoring the faint voice of caution in the back of his mind. Perhaps he needed a valid reason to pull it over. Well, I'll find one, Todd thought. As he pulled behind the sedan, a mild tension twitched in his stomach. He'd done this 100 times, often for minor infractions that ended in warnings, but occasionally he discovered something bigger. Todd relished those moments, that sense of self-importance. The idea of uncovering wrongdoing fueled him. He stepped out of his cruiser, advanced on the driver's side window. A slender black woman, mid-30s, was behind the wheel. She wore a crisp blouse, tasteful jewelry, and had an air of quiet composure about her. Todd's eyes narrowed. License, registration, he barked. She obliged, polite but wary. A flicker of annoyance passed through him. She seemed too calm, too sure of herself. He caught his own reflection in the tinted glass. Uniform crisp, the letters NYPD gleaming. I am in charge here, he reminded himself. Little did Todd know how that next exchange would set off a chain of events that would upend his career and forever brand him as the worst version of a cop. Valerie Lawson, though the badge on her driver's license read Valerie Moore Lawson, had grown used to living under the radar. The wife of Captain Desmond Lawson, newly promoted to lead the 109th Precinct, she prided herself on independence and kept a low profile. She rarely leveraged her husband's name, preferring to maintain her own identity in the city she loved. That evening, Valerie was en route to pick up a donation for a local community center's youth outreach program. She looked forward to seeing the kids, who often referred to her as Miss V. She'd been coordinating with sponsors, collecting sports equipment and books, entirely immersed in the community she served. She never imagined a routine drive home would collide with an overzealous officer's prejudice. When Officer Brannigan demanded her license and registration, Valerie handed them over without complaint. She'd learned long ago that compliance in these scenarios could prevent misunderstandings. But the hostility in his eyes unnerved her. He appeared to search her face for a reaction, scanning the interior of her sedan as though expecting contraband. The pointed tension in his stance triggered her instincts to remain calm. "Any particular reason you pulled me over, officer?" Valerie asked politely. If the tinted windows were an issue, they conformed to the legal limit. She carried all proper paperwork. Officer Brannigan's jaw tightened. "License plate is partially obscured," he claimed, though, in reality, the plate was fully visible. With a dismissive wave, he ordered her to step out of the vehicle. Valerie felt her pulse quicken. Typically, for minor infractions, that wasn't standard procedure. A creeping dread told her this was something else. Valerie stepped out, cooperating. Todd's eyes flicked over her, noticing she had no contraband, no suspicious bulge in her purse or pockets. Despite finding nothing obviously wrong, he pressed on, rummaging through her car's glove compartment, trunk, and back seat. She objected politely, "Officer, I don't consent to a search." That's when his composure cracked. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," Todd snapped. "Shut up and stand where I can see you." A cold knot formed in Valerie's chest. She recognized the dynamic. A cop overreaching, certain he'd find cause if he pushed hard enough. And so it happened. Todd's find ended up being a small sealed medication bottle, Valerie's prescription, properly labeled. No reason for alarm, but Todd seized it with triumphant zeal. "Possession of suspicious substances," he declared, ignoring her protests. In that moment, what should have been a routine traffic stop spiraled into a racially charged abuse of power. Todd's next move, taking Valerie into custody, would sow the seeds of his own destruction. Officer Brannigan marched Valerie into the precinct with an air of smug self-satisfaction. The on-duty desk sergeant, Carmen Alvarez, lifted a brow as Todd presented the meager evidence, the sealed prescription with Valerie's name clearly visible. Alvarez wasn't naive. She recognized this arrest as flimsy at best. But she also knew Todd's reputation. He liked to push boundaries, and few in the precinct were willing to challenge him head-on. Valerie stood quietly, her expression calm but inwardly seething at the injustice. She hadn't revealed her identity. She wanted to see how far Todd's cruelty would go. In her mind, she recited her husband's advice: "Always keep your cool, document everything." She silently thanked her lucky stars for having a fully charged phone in her purse, though she wondered how she might retrieve it. The station's holding area was no better. Grey walls, fluorescent lights, a bench with chipped paint. Todd removed Valerie's belongings, tagging them dismissively. As he patted her down, unnecessarily rough, in her view, Valerie felt a flash of anger. She remained composed, but inside, she fumed at the demeaning process. Officer Alvarez watched from behind the desk, lips pursed. "Officer, this is a mistake," Valerie said softly. "That bottle you confiscated was my lawfully prescribed medication. My name is on it. You have no grounds to hold me." Todd merely shrugged. "Tell it to the judge," he said with a sneer, ordering her into a cell. She tried to keep her posture erect, to exude dignity. Yet the clang of the metal door behind her rang ominously. For all Todd's bravado, he hadn't even read her Miranda rights properly. She suspected he believed he was doing the city a favor or indulging in a twisted sense of power. Hours ticked by with no sign that Todd would relent. Alvarez occasionally shot Valerie a sympathetic look, but said nothing. That uneasy hush permeating the station was due, in part, to rumors swirling around the precinct. A new captain was arriving soon. Some rumored it would be a younger officer with a reputation for fairness and discipline. If only they knew. If only Todd knew. Valerie's mind flicked to her husband, Captain Desmond Lawson. She imagined his reaction when he learned his wife was being held on false charges by one of his subordinates. And ironically, he was set to assume command at the 109th the next morning, just in time for the unveiling of a new community policing initiative. Todd Brannigan had no idea how catastrophic his petty malice would become. Morning broke with an anxious hum through the precinct. Officers hustled in fresh uniforms, brass was expected to visit, and rumors of the new captain's arrival buzzed in hushed excitement. Meanwhile, Valerie had spent the night in the holding cell, her patience eroding. She'd requested a phone call repeatedly, but Todd ignored her. Desk Sergeant Alvarez, clearly uneasy, deferred to Todd's authority in an attempt to avoid conflict. At 8 a.m. sharp, the station doors swung open to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp uniform, Captain Desmond Lawson. He was accompanied by Deputy Inspector Monica Reyes from NYPD's Central Office. The two brought an air of calm authority that instantly shifted the station's atmosphere. People snapped to attention. Sergeant Alvarez visibly swallowed her nerves. Everyone had known a new captain was coming, but they had no idea he was stepping in that very morning. Captain Lawson greeted the staff politely, shaking hands, exchanging a few words. He carried himself with the self-assuredness of someone who had dedicated his life to the force, yet never lost touch with his moral compass. Beneath his formal demeanor, he searched the faces in the room for a glimpse of his wife, Valerie. He knew she occasionally visited stations for community outreach, but had no reason to suspect she'd come to the 109th this early, especially not under lock and key. Deputy Inspector Reyes initiated a quick briefing, wanting Captain Lawson to see the precinct's layout. They headed toward the holding area, which was ironically Todd Brannigan's domain. Sergeant Alvarez trailed behind, her anxiety mounting. "Does he know about the woman locked up last night?" she wondered. Turning a corner, they passed a row of cells. At first, Captain Lawson cast a cursory glance at the detainees, mostly petty offenders, sobering up. Then, at the last cell, he froze, his eyes locked on a weary yet composed Valerie, who rose from the bench, surprise and relief in her gaze. What was his wife doing behind bars? He felt his pulse hammer. "Valerie?" he managed, voice heavy with shock. The entire group halted. She offered a tight nod, stepping close to the bars. "Desmond." Without hesitation, Captain Lawson turned to Sergeant Alvarez, expression dark. "Explain this, now." Alvarez stammered. "She was arrested last night. Officer Brannigan claimed suspicious contraband, tinted windows, license plate issues, but I think it was a misunderstanding." Desmond's eyes flashed. He stepped forward, demanding the keys. Right then, Todd Brannigan strolled in, coffee in hand. Upon seeing the scene, confusion flickered across his face. He had no idea that the woman he'd casually locked up for a bogus charge was the new captain's wife, and the gravity of that error was about to land on him like a ton of bricks. Officer Todd Brannigan's heart sank as he grasped the situation. The woman he'd jailed on a whim, using a flimsy excuse and a racist assumption, was the wife of Captain Desmond Lawson, the very man who now commanded the 109th Precinct. Alarm bells rang in Todd's mind as he tried to maintain composure. Captain Lawson fumbled with the cell keys, face grim. He swung the door open, guiding Valerie out gently. She immediately fell into his arms, relief flooding through her. Todd, meanwhile, stood paralyzed, coffee growing lukewarm in his grip. Deputy Inspector Reyes cut through the tension with professional efficiency. "Sergeant Alvarez," she said, "coolly escort Miss S. Lawson to the captain's office. Make sure she's comfortable. Then gather all documentation related to her arrest." Valerie lifted her chin, addressing her husband quietly. "Desmond, I'm fine. Just handle this. Please, we can talk later." She walked away with Alvarez, her dignity still intact despite the humiliating ordeal. The corridor that had been bustling with the morning routine went eerily quiet. Officers peered out of their cubicles, aware something explosive was happening. Word spread at lightning speed. Officer Brannigan arrested the new captain's wife. Gossip hopped from desk to desk, fueling anxiety among those who had turned a blind eye to Todd's questionable conduct in the past. Captain Lawson handed the keys back to Todd. For a moment, their eyes locked in a silent, tension-charged exchange. Todd tried to stammer an explanation. "Sir, one eye—" But the captain cut him off with an upraised hand. "In my office," Lawson growled, voice low. "Now." A hush settled over the precinct as the three of them, Captain Lawson, Todd, and Deputy Inspector Reyes, marched into the captain's office. Once inside, Captain Lawson shut the door firmly. He inhaled, fighting to keep his composure. "Explain yourself," he demanded, staring at Todd. Officer Brannigan's mind raced. He tried to concoct a justification that might salvage his career. "Sir, I only saw tinted windows, suspected contraband. I had to do my job." Captain Lawson's steely glare cut him short. "Your job is to enforce the law fairly," he spat. "My wife told me your so-called contraband was her prescription medication. You jailed her without cause, withheld her phone call. This is beyond protocol. It's malicious. And I want the truth." Todd swallowed, realizing the depth of trouble he was in. Meanwhile, just outside, the rest of the precinct staff whispered among themselves, anticipating that Todd Brannigan's once promising career was about to unravel in a very public, very humiliating way. Tucked away in the captain's office, Officer Todd Brannigan felt perspiration bead along his temples. He'd never imagined confronting a superior officer under these circumstances, certainly not with his racist assumptions laid bare, and certainly not with the officer's spouse as the victim. Yet here he stood, pinned by Captain Lawson's scathing gaze, with Deputy Inspector Reyes waiting silently. Todd's first instinct was to deny wrongdoing. "Sir, it might look bad," he began, forcing out a shaky breath, "but tinted windows are a frequent cause for traffic stops. The prescription, well, it could have been mislabeled, or something illegal. I swear I was just being cautious." Captain Lawson's fists clenched at his sides. "Have you even read the label? It clearly matches my wife's name. This was no probable cause for an arrest. And you never read her rights properly, withheld her phone call. Explain that." Todd stuttered. She became agitated. "I was concerned for officer safety. So enough," Lawson barked. The tension crackled like static. Deputy Inspector Reyes quietly observed, her expression unreadable. Todd realized this was not a simple dressing down. This situation had potential to trigger an internal affairs avalanche. Lawson forced a deep breath, controlling his tone. "Officer Brannigan, effective immediately. You're relieved of duty. Pending an investigation. Turn in your badge and firearm to Deputy Inspector Reyes. Now." A jolt of shock tore through Todd. "Sir, wait. You can't. I'm just—" Captain Lawson didn't budge. "I have the authority to do exactly that. I suggest you choose your words carefully from here on out. You'll be placed on administrative leave while we investigate your misconduct. IA will decide the rest." He paused, gaze unwavering. "You do realize you assaulted her dignity, abused your authority, and demonstrated blatant bias, correct?" Todd's face flushed. He handed his badge and gun to Reyes, who took them without comment. Inside, Todd's thoughts churned. "I can spin this, I just need time," but a cold, sick feeling settled in his gut. He remembered bits of conversation around the station about a new captain who had zero tolerance for corruption. Was I set up to fail? He wondered irrationally. But deep down, he knew the only person to blame was himself. He left the office in a daze. Outside, fellow officers averted their eyes. Some radiated schadenfreude, others pity. The hush that followed him out the door felt like a harbinger of doom. Todd's illusions about his stable career had been shattered. and every step he took hammered home the reality that his life was about to take a catastrophic turn. When Valerie finished giving her statement to a sympathetic Sergeant Alvarez, she waited in the station's break room. The atmosphere remained tense, murmurs circulating about Todd Brannigan's meltdown. Captain Lawson would soon finish dealing with official procedures, but for now, it was Valerie's chance to breathe and process the whirlwind of events. She recalled Todd's condescending tone, how easily he escalated the situation, and the quietly malignant glint in his eyes that spoke volumes of racial bias. Though furious, Valerie also felt sorrow. How many others had Officer Brannigan targeted who lacked the resources or connections she had? That thought weighed heavily on her heart. She sipped a paper cup of lukewarm water, pushing away the memory of the holding cell's cold bench. "This can't just be about me," she told herself. If Todd had done this once, he likely had done it before or would again. Perhaps her ordeal could bring accountability. In the dimly lit break room, an older detective named Samuel Sam Grimes entered. He nodded politely at Valerie, aware of her status, but seeing her as a person first. "You all right?" he asked gently, voice thick with a paternal concern. Valerie managed a small smile. "I'll be fine, Detective. Thank you." Sam studied the floor for a moment before speaking. "Todd, he's had complaints. Nothing pinned down, but rumors swirl about him hassling folks in certain neighborhoods. I guess none of it stuck because no one wanted to push back. Maybe they were too scared or didn't have evidence. Or the color of their skin made it easy for him to disregard them." She nodded, recalling the uneasy feeling that had overtaken her when Todd singled her out. "I want to see this through," she whispered. "Not just for me. Others deserve justice too." Sam exhaled, relief and caution in his posture. "Captain Lawson's a good man. He'll do what's right, but you might face backlash. Just know some of us are behind you." His words bolstered her. She gripped the edge of the table, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a surge of empowerment. "Thank you, Detective," she murmured. As Sam left, Valerie allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Darkness had come in the form of a racist cop, but so had the opportunity to shine a spotlight on systemic issues in the precinct. She wondered how her husband would navigate this storm while balancing his new leadership role. Regardless, she resolved that Todd Brannigan's hateful misconduct wouldn't simply vanish into departmental cover-ups or bureaucratic excuses. Not this time. Captain Desmond Lawson's first official day as head of the 109th Precinct became an unanticipated crisis management drill. After placing Todd Brannigan on administrative leave, Lawson called a staff meeting. Tension thickened the air in the briefing room. Officers, detectives, and administrative personnel gathered, exchanging uneasy glances. No one dared speak out of turn, with the new captain's composure on a razor edge. Clearing his throat, Lawson began, "I'm aware rumors are flying. Let's get the facts straight. Yesterday, Officer Todd Brannigan made an arrest that contravened multiple protocols, potentially violating a citizen's civil rights. That citizen, in this case, happens to be my wife, though that detail isn't the core issue. I want to emphasize that if similar misconduct has occurred against others, we will not brush it under the rug." A hush followed. The statement made it clear Lawson intended to root out problems rather than preserve any thin blue line. Some officers nodded grimly, recalling minor controversies involving Todd's questionable stops. A flicker of hope stirred in the hearts of those tired of complicity. "It's no secret I was brought here," Lawson continued, "to implement reforms, strengthen community trust, and address any signs of misconduct. The events of the past 24 hours are deeply troubling. My door is open. If you have information about wrongdoing, I urge you to come forward. Let's do what we can to rebuild integrity. A murmur rippled through the room. A few officers seemed visibly uncomfortable, but others appeared quietly relieved. Lawson nodded, dismissing them. People scattered. Detective Sam Grimes lingered, offering Lawson a firm handshake. "Captain, it took guts to handle it this straightforwardly. If you need anything, I'm in your corner." Meanwhile, Todd Brannigan spent the day at home in a state of shock. The phone rang intermittently, some acquaintances calling to express disbelief, others to keep distance. Social media threads teemed with rumors. Rookie cop arrested captain's wife. Racial profiling in the 109th. Panicked, Todd tried to craft a statement, but realized he was under gag orders from the department. He felt the walls closing in. As the day wore on, Captain Lawson prepared for a meeting with the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau IAB. They had already heard of the fiasco and wanted details. Lawson's personal feelings, anger, betrayal, worry for Valerie tangled with professional duty. He had to walk a tightrope, ensuring justice for his wife while preserving the precinct's morale, all under the glare of public scrutiny. One thing was certain: the real damage was only beginning to unfold. Todd's reckless act had sparked a reckoning that would soon surge beyond the quiet corridors of the 109th Precinct, echoing throughout the NYPD and the community it served. Later that same evening, Captain Desmond Lawson finally found a moment of calm in his new office. Cardboard boxes half filled with personal effects sat untouched, overshadowed by the day's chaos. Valerie joined him, looking weary but determined. He rose, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "You all right?" he asked softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed lingering anger. "I'm better now," she whispered. "But I can't stop thinking about how Todd might have done this to someone else who lacked the means or voice to fight back." Lawson rubbed her shoulders soothingly. "I know," he said. "We'll investigate. I promised on my first day I'd bring accountability. And that includes dealing with a racist, power-tripping officer." Valerie's expression hardened. "We need to ensure there's real change, not just a scapegoating. People will assume you're overreacting because I'm your wife, but it's bigger than me." He admired her conviction. Valerie had always been a champion for fairness, whether at her community center or standing up to bullies. Now, she was locked in a fight within the NYPD's own ranks. "I'm scheduling a meeting with Internal Affairs tomorrow. They'll want your formal statement. Are you up for that?" She squared her shoulders. "Absolutely." The next morning, the couple drove together to One Police Plaza in Manhattan, where the IAB's offices resided. A crisp breeze whipped at them as they crossed the sidewalk. Inside, they navigated the white-tiled corridors, passing by polished nameplates. An intangible heaviness came with the knowledge that they were stepping into a formal complaint process, one that could reshape Todd's future and possibly the entire precinct's culture. They were greeted by Lieutenant Regina Pierce, a methodical but fair investigator. She led Valerie into a private interview room while Captain Lawson waited outside, respecting procedural boundaries. For the better part of an hour, Valerie recounted the arrest, the night in the cell, the intimidation. Each detail was typed meticulously by Pierce, who occasionally paused to clarify or request specifics. When they emerged, Valerie looked drained yet resolute. "She said they'll also interview Todd," Valerie murmured, "and any witnesses. Sergeant Alvarez, maybe others who saw his behavior." Captain Lawson nodded. "It's out of our hands for now, but I trust Pierce to be thorough." Leaving the building, they felt both relief and the weight of what might come next. Todd Brannigan's wrongdoing had been pushed into official channels, unstoppable now. No matter how he might squirm or attempt to justify his actions, the wheels of justice had begun turning, driven not just by Valerie's personal story, but by the universal demand to root out prejudice in the force. Back at the 109th precinct, lines were being drawn, some openly, others in secret. A handful of officers believed Todd Brannigan was being railroaded by the new captain. They chalked it up to nepotism, captains protecting his wife, they whispered. Perhaps they had personal friendships with Todd or shared his questionable attitudes. They spoke in hushed corners, bemoaning a future of what they scornfully termed political correctness. But a larger faction of officers, especially those who had clashed with Todd's abrasive style, felt relieved that accountability had arrived. They realized that Todd's brazen disregard for protocol endangered not only civilians, but also the entire precinct's reputation. Detective Sam Grimes quietly formed a small group that began re-examining old complaints lodged against Todd. If other victims had stepped forward only to be dismissed, maybe the tide had turned in their favor. In the break room, tensions flared when Officer Rachel Benton overheard two older cops, Mills and Garza, trash-talking Valerie. They called her some high-maintenance chick playing the race card. Benton, usually mild-mannered, snapped, "Hey, enough. You have no right to smear her." "She was arrested without cause, that's on Todd." Mills sneered. "Oh, so you're with the new captain, huh? Figures." Another, Benton cut him off, glowering. "Another what? A cop who believes in the oath we took." "Keep your biases to yourself." She stormed out, leaving Mills and Garza fuming. But Benton's words, echoed by her colleagues, signaled a shift. Todd's brand of policing was no longer unchallenged. Meanwhile, Captain Lawson monitored the precinct's mood from a respectful distance. He recognized the friction and braced for pushback, but he refused to compromise on the principle that officers, like the citizens they serve, must obey the law. One day, after shift change, Todd Brannigan slipped into the station to retrieve personal items from his locker. The hush that followed him was palpable. Eyes flicked over him, silently judging. He pretended indifference, though a pit churned in his stomach. This place, once a source of pride, now felt hostile. He rummaged quickly, grabbed a few belongings, a jacket, a photograph of his father pinned to the door, and left, ignoring the stares. In those polarized corridors, the seeds of Todd's downfall continued to grow. Loyalty to his racist worldview found fewer allies in the precinct each passing day. Evidence, testimonies, and resentment were stacking up against him, and soon enough, he would learn that once the wheels of accountability start rolling, they rarely stop. Lieutenant Regina Pierce wasted no time. After interviewing Valerie Lawson, she scheduled a formal questioning of Todd Brannigan under departmental protocol. By then, Todd had consulted a police union representative who advised him to tread carefully, especially in light of swirling accusations beyond just Valerie's arrest. In a sterile conference room at one police plaza, Todd sat across from Pierce, flanked by his union rep. Todd's face was drawn, pale. He mentally rehearsed a narrative to justify the arrest: tinted windows, suspicious container, perceived belligerence. But each question Pierce asked cut through his flimsy justifications, exposing his biases. "How did Miss S. Lawson behave belligerently?" Pierce inquired, scanning her notes. Todd scrambled. "She was uncooperative, challenged my authority," he muttered. Pierce flipped a page. According to multiple eyewitness statements, she remained calm and polite. She paused, letting the statement hang. "Officer, you claimed the prescription was unlabeled, but we have photographic evidence showing her name clearly printed. How do you explain that discrepancy?" Todd's throat went dry. "Maybe I overlooked it," he mumbled. "It was dark. I was on alert, didn't want to take chances." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Yet departmental policy is clear that a properly labeled prescription isn't grounds for arrest. Why would you escalate to detention?" He fidgeted. "She gave me attitude. I can't remember exactly. Thought it might be a forgery." Pierce's tone remained cool. "And you withheld her phone call for how many hours?" Todd felt the trap close in. I was busy with paperwork. It slipped my mind. Pierce said nothing for a few beats, letting the tension swirl. Then she calmly slid a document across the table. We've received statements from other citizens with similar claims about your stops. One African-American man reported you threatened to find a reason to charge him. Another Latino woman described an almost identical scenario as Miss Lawson's, except she was too scared to file a complaint. They recognized your badge from your nameplate, Officer Todd Brannigan. Any comment on that? Todd's face burned. He bit out. Baseless allegations. People looking to cause trouble. Pierce gave a slight nod, scribbling on her notepad. The union rep squeezed Todd's arm, a silent warning to remain quiet. In that moment, Todd realized these baseless allegations had stacked up high enough to bury him. The meeting ended on a grim note. Pierce laid out the next steps. The IAB's findings would be forwarded to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges, as well as an internal disciplinary hearing. Todd emerged, limbs stiff with dread. If once he'd believed wearing a uniform made him invincible, that delusion had shattered. The system he thought would protect him was now prepared to hold him accountable for the damage he had wrought. As the internal affairs probe advanced, word of the scandal leaked to local media outlets. Stations like WNYW Fox 5, the New York Daily News, and smaller digital platforms seized the headline, "Rookie Cop Arrests Captain's Wife Allegations of Racism at the 109th Precinct." Reporters swarmed the precinct entrance daily, hoping to catch a glimpse of Captain Lawson or Valerie. Meanwhile, social media erupted with hashtags like #JusticeForValerie and #NYPDAccountability, spurring heated debates over police conduct. Community activists demanded deeper investigations into Todd Brannigan's track record, suspecting a pattern of racial profiling. Captain Lawson found himself thrust into a spotlight he never wanted. He was forced to give a brief press conference outside the precinct, standing before a row of microphones. A throng of cameras clicked and whirred. Valerie waited quietly at his side. With measured calm, Lawson addressed the swirling storm. "This department does not condone any form of misconduct or bias. We are cooperating fully with the internal affairs investigation. As both a captain and a husband, I want to see a fair resolution for the citizen, my wife, who was wronged. And I also reaffirm our commitment to building trust with the communities we serve." A cacophony of reporters' questions followed. "Captain, do you believe your wife was targeted due to racial bias? Is Todd Brannigan's record tarnished by other complaints? How can the NYPD fix systemic discrimination?" Valerie stepped forward, determined not to hide behind her husband. "I appreciate the public's concern," she said, voice firm. "I was fortunate to have resources and family support. Many aren't so lucky. I believe we need to examine the structure that allows officers like Brannigan to go unchecked. This is bigger than just one arrest. It's about accountability and justice for all." The cameras captured her poised stance and unwavering words. Behind the scenes, Todd Brannigan watched the broadcast from his apartment with mounting despair. He recognized the unstoppable wave of public condemnation. Online comments tore his name apart, some calling him an outright racist. Others branded him a disgrace to the NYPD uniform. He paced his living room, phone silent except for a few texts from equally embattled friends, each urging him to keep your head up. But Todd's mind churned with bitterness and fear. "If they do this to me, I'll go down fighting," he thought. Yet the media storm showed no sign of relenting. The truth was out, the city buzzing with demands for deeper reforms. And Todd Brannigan stood alone, publicly disgraced, and waiting for a final judgment that was sure to be harsh. Inside the 109th precinct, The tension that had simmered for weeks rose to a boiling point. Despite Todd Brannigan's suspension, the aftermath of his actions lingered in every conversation. Some officers, particularly younger recruits, saw Captain Lawson's leadership as a breath of fresh air. They wanted to do better, to break free from the suffocating hush that had once protected cops like Todd. Others, especially a few old guard holdouts, resented the shift. Meanwhile, Valerie continued her community outreach efforts, determined not to let fear or anger derail her. She visited the youth center where she volunteered, stepping into lively chaos, kids tossing basketballs, reading donated books. A hush fell when they spotted her. A teen boy, Jamal, approached timidly. "Miss V, we saw you on TV. You okay?" She forced a soft smile. "I'm okay. Just going through something that needs to be fixed." Jamal's eyes flickered with concern. "We got your back. People know you always do good for the neighborhood." Touched, Valerie patted his shoulder, heart swelling with gratitude for their support. It reminded her why she couldn't retreat from the fight. If she, with her privileges and position, backed down, what hope was there for kids like Jamal? Back at home, Captain Lawson grappled with sleepless nights and the impossible balancing act, leading an embattled precinct while supporting his wife through ongoing media scrutiny. One evening, he and Valerie sat on their living room couch, takeaway containers half-eaten on the coffee table. City lights flickered beyond the windows. "I worry about you," Lawson admitted quietly. "The press, the tension, this can't be easy." Valerie leaned against him. "We can't shy away from it, Desmond. If we do, Todd and cops like him will stay hidden, repeating their abuses." He exhaled, weary but resolute. "I'm scheduling a meeting with the district attorney next week. They'll review the internal affairs findings. Todd could face criminal charges for false arrest, misconduct, and civil rights violations." Valerie's gaze dropped. "He should be held accountable, yes, but I also hope this leads to real change, not just punishment for one man. The system let him flourish." They clasped hands, forging unity in the face of adversity. Both recognized that the next stage, public hearings, possible court proceedings, would test them further. Yet each step forward felt purposeful. Todd's hateful misuse of authority had ignited a push for reform. They refused to abandon. Even if the burden felt heavy, they found strength in one another, determined to see justice served not just for Valerie's personal ordeal, but for the broader community demanding better policing. At last, the day arrived when Todd Brannigan's fate would be decided. The district attorney, under pressure from the public and with a detailed IAB report in hand, held a preliminary hearing to determine if there was sufficient evidence to proceed with criminal charges. The hearing took place in a packed courthouse room near the heart of Manhattan. Reporters lined up outside for any scrap of information. Captain Lawson and Valerie arrived together, flanked by detectives sympathetic to their cause. Todd, on the other hand, entered with his union-appointed lawyer. He looked gaunt, eyes flickering with residual defiance. "This is all one big overreaction," he tried to tell himself, yet the trembling in his hands betrayed deep fear. The DA's assistant outlined the allegations: false arrest, unlawful search, racial profiling, withholding a detainee's right to a phone call, and potential intimidation. Evidence included testimonies from Valerie, Sergeant Alvarez, Officer Rachel Benton, Detective Sam Grimes, and 2 civilians who'd come forward describing parallel experiences. Body cam footage from Todd's uniform, though partial, revealed enough to confirm he never read Miranda rights or adhered to protocol. A hush fell as Todd's lawyer attempted a defense, citing miscommunication and fear for officer safety. But the judge listened with a weary expression, glancing at the IAB findings. After arguments concluded, The judge set a date for the official trial, declaring the evidence strong enough to warrant pursuing criminal charges. Outside, cameras flashed. Todd, face blotchy with humiliation, darted through the crowd, microphones shoved in his direction. "Officer Brannigan, are you a racist? Do you regret what you did?" He ignored them all, slipping into a waiting car. Inside, he pounded the steering wheel, cursing. His career, if not his entire life, now seemed irreparably damaged. Meanwhile, Valerie and Lawson fielded a few questions from the press. "We trust the judicial process," Lawson said solemnly. "We want accountability, not vengeance. The goal is to ensure no one else endures what Valerie experienced." Valerie added, "I hope this case sends a clear message that abuse of power, especially when fueled by racism, can't be tolerated. We need reforms so the good officers aren't overshadowed by the bad." As they walked away, reporters rushed to file breaking news updates. Criminal charges filed against NYPD officer in high-profile racial profiling case. The city's attention zeroed in on the upcoming trial. Within days, Todd Brannigan's official dismissal from the NYPD followed. A new wave of relief swept through the 109th precinct as officers recognized that the darkest shadow among them was finally gone. Yet for Valerie and Lawson, the pursuit of justice wasn't entirely over. They'd fight on in court to ensure Todd faced full accountability for his hateful actions. The weeks that followed brought a sense of cautious hope to the 109th precinct. With Todd Brannigan officially terminated, Captain Desmond Lawson turned his attention to reorganizing the department and fostering new community partnerships. He held a series of open forums, inviting neighborhood residents, church leaders, and business owners to voice concerns about policing. Attendance soared. To ensure transparency, he arranged for a local TV channel, NYONA, to occasionally film these meetings. Valerie stood by her husband's side, both literally and symbolically. She watched him address the crowd at a large forum hosted in the Queens Community Center, the same facility where she volunteered. Dozens of chairs stretched across the gym floor, every seat occupied. People of diverse ages and backgrounds listened eagerly as Captain Lawson explained steps to improve trust, enhanced bias training, body cameras for all officers, regular community reviews of complaints. After his speech, a short Q&A ensued. A middle-aged mother asked about ensuring safer traffic stops. A young activist demanded body cam footage be released to families promptly. Captain Lawson answered each question respectfully, promising incremental yet real changes. Valerie felt a surge of pride witnessing her husband's commitment to forging a better NYPD culture, one that Todd Brannigan's actions had threatened to undermine. Outside the center, a group of local activists approached Valerie. Miss Fee, one said, a shy smile on her face. "We're so glad you never backed down. Because of your case, my cousin decided to file a formal complaint against an officer in another precinct." The woman's eyes brimmed with gratitude. He said, "If the captain's wife can speak out, so can I." Valerie's heart warmed. "Thank you for telling me," she replied gently. "Keep speaking up. No one should fear the people meant to protect them." Meanwhile, Todd's legal troubles marched on. The criminal case advanced to a pretrial motion, and Todd's attorney scrambled to reduce charges or negotiate a plea deal. The mountain of evidence, plus the damaging witness accounts, meant Todd faced possible jail time, or at least a felony record that would bar him from policing again. Whispers hinted that if Todd pleaded guilty to lesser charges, he might avoid the maximum penalty. But his career in law enforcement was over, his reputation irreparably stained. Detective Sam Grimes, who'd quietly compiled statements from Todd's past victims, stayed in contact with the DA's office. "There's a pattern here," he told an assistant DA. detailing how Todd had historically stopped people of color for petty reasons, then escalated the encounters. The assistant nodded, remarking that Todd's case could become a cautionary tale about the cost of racist policing, especially if he decided to gamble on a trial instead of a plea. Captain Lawson and Valerie prepared themselves mentally for the possibility of testifying in open court. Though they hoped Todd might accept responsibility, they also steeled themselves to face him if he insisted on a trial. In quiet moments at home, they discussed the emotional toll, how to keep the momentum for broader reforms, and the potential for backlash from those claiming the entire ordeal was overblown. One autumn afternoon, the phone rang at the Lawson home. It was the DA's office with news. Todd had taken a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to falsifying arrest paperwork and official misconduct. The other charges, including potential civil rights violations, were conditionally dropped on the condition that Todd never seek law enforcement work again. He'd face probation, mandatory cultural sensitivity training, plus restitution and likely civil suits from the victims. The official criminal sentencing would follow in a few weeks. Valerie felt a mixture of relief and frustration. On one hand, Todd was held accountable. On the other, she worried it wasn't enough. Her husband gave her hand a supportive squeeze. "He's out of uniform, never returning. That alone might save countless people from the torment you faced," Lawson said softly. "Let's take what we can from this." The day of sentencing arrived with far less fanfare than the initial headlines. A subdued Todd Brannigan stood before a judge, wearing a wrinkled suit. He avoided eye contact with Captain Lawson and Valerie, who attended quietly at the back of the courtroom. The judge reiterated that Todd's plea guaranteed he could never again serve in law enforcement, a stinging condemnation of his betrayal of public trust. After the gavel's echo, Todd exited swiftly, a broken shell of the arrogant officer he once was. He'd told the judge haltingly that he never intended to cause harm, but no apology could undo the trauma he inflicted on Valerie or the scars left on many other unsuspecting citizens. Walking out into the crisp fall air, Valerie let out a shaky breath, as though releasing months of pent-up tension. Captain Lawson wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "We did it," he said softly. "He's done. The system recognized that we can't allow racism behind a badge." Nodding, Valerie closed her eyes momentarily. "It doesn't fix everything, but it's a start." In the months that followed, the 109th Precinct experienced a quiet transformation. Under Captain Lawson's watch, officers underwent new training sessions, the complaint review process was streamlined, and trust-building initiatives continued. Community gatherings, once small and tense, blossomed into real dialogue. While not a perfect revolution, it was a meaningful step forward. For Valerie, life eased back into normal rhythms. She continued her outreach, forging deeper bonds with local families. Occasionally, a mother or teen approached, referencing the news story about her arrest. Each time, Valerie affirmed that justice could triumph if people stood firm and demanded better. She never boasted about being the captain's wife. Her identity remained rooted in personal compassion, not rank. On a mild winter afternoon, almost a year after the fateful incident, the precinct held a holiday charity drive. Coats for kids, toys for families, and volunteer haircuts filled the station's lobby with warmth and laughter. Valerie, helping sort donations, exchanged a proud smile with Captain Lawson, who greeted children with jokes and high fives. Detective Sam Grimes manned a table for donated books, while Officer Rachel Benton supervised a brand new police cadet, ensuring the new generation observed compassion in action. In that bright scene of generosity, the ghost of Todd Brannigan's racist cruelty felt distant, yet the lesson remained etched in everyone's minds. Policing demanded responsibility and respect for every member of the community. One slip into hate or arrogance could topple a career, or worse, wreck innocent lives. The precinct had learned that lesson the hard way, but they had learned it nonetheless. And so, though the path forward held challenges, the 109th found renewed purpose. No one forgot how a single act of bias nearly tore them apart, or how Valerie's courage in stepping up, backed by her husband's steadfast leadership, forced the system to confront the painful truth. In the end, the darkness Todd created paved the way for a more enlightened approach to service, offering a glimmer of hope for real change, one precinct at a time. No one ever claimed that justice comes easily. Officer Todd Brannigan's downfall revealed the damage a single act of racism can inflict, both on the victims and the institution meant to protect them. Yet Valerie Lawson's courage, bolstered by Captain Desmond Lawson's unwavering support, made a difference, not just for her, but for countless others who once felt unheard. Their fight sparked vital reforms, illuminating a path toward accountability and integrity within the NYPD. If you found this story riveting, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement allows us to continue bringing real-life drama fiction and important social commentary to your screen tales that remind us how one voice can confront deep-rooted injustice and inspire meaningful change. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that celebrate resilience, compassion, and the power of collective action.